Yo, yo, yo. Welcome everybody to the review. Oh man, we had a lot of folks very upset at the Lattice crew over my over the piece that they did on PEDs that are potentially viable for climbers. And I am, I'm a little disappointed, but I'm not entirely surprised. I just kind of wanted to fire up the stream, put a reaction together to the actual content. I wanted to give some disclaimers. I wanted to shout those guys out and just sort of give a little bit of an overview. So first off, Josh was awesome. We were supposed to talk for 45 minutes. We ended up talking for closer to like an hour and a half. He was super inquisitive, but he is not a guy that does drugs. And as a guy that does not do drugs, he can't speak super intelligently on some of the nuances of some of the nootropics, some of the PEDs themselves. He watched a little bit of my content, but he said that it's really a little bit over his head. He, he is interested in what PEDs can do, but it's not a thing that he is actively as enthralled with as I am. So obviously, it makes sense that certain context is going to be left out. I thought he did a great job at starting the conversation about PEDs, and I kind of wanted to hop in here to really continue that conversation and provide a lot of context that the video did not provide. With that in mind, there are a couple of things that I just wanted to do as some disclaimers prior to getting into the video itself. Number one, while the WADA list might show all of the vectors that are possible for exploitation to do drugs, that does not mean you should use that as your guide to use pharma. I think that that's unhinged. There's a lot of things that are on the WADA banned list that are like obviously not meant to be taken for a whole slew of reasons, much less specifically for climbers. Number two, I have never or will never talk about a compound without mentioning its side effects. Or there isn't enough data to say that you should proceed with caution. Do not do drugs. I could not be more explicit with that. Even though I am an avid steroid enthusiast, I have never once talked about any compound without mentioning these are upsides, here are downsides, and you should get lab work. That is always my raison d'etre. That is my reason to exist. Next up, stop being fucking Valley Christians. Like, real talk. The climbing community always does this. Royal Rodmans was chopping Warren Harding's bolts on the dawn wall until he realized, oh shit, this climb's amazing. They called crash pads stupid and weak up until they became like super necessary and, like a part of the sport. They said sport climbing was not real climbing until it became super mainstream. And now all of this is like accepted and part of the culture and part of the community. And, that doesn't mean that steroids should be mainstream or accepted, but it means that we should be able to have an adult conversation about it without pruding up and weirding out and being like, meh. I hate that. I think that you guys are adults. I think that you guys can speak intelligently on it. If you don't want to do drugs, don't do drugs. No one's here forcing you to do drugs. If you want to have a more informed conversation about drugs, that's what we do here. Next up, unless you're my doctor or my cardiologist, or Vigorous Steve, or Kurt Havens, or Dean St. Mart, or Coach Colton, or Leo Longevity back from the dead, I do not value your opinion on my drug use. If you have some opinions on my research, you are super welcome, and I encourage that conversation. I would love nothing more than to have someone either look at my research and say, hey, I like this, this, that, and the other, or oh, I disagree with it, here's the study, or here's my anecdotal experience, or here's my blood work. I think that's amazing, and that's the conversations that I want to encourage. But if you just say, oh, why is this dude doing drugs? I do not care. That is of very little interest to me. But with that said, I want to go ahead and get into the video. We're going to go react to the whole thing. I'm going to go into more detail on stuff that wasn't necessarily covered in the actual video that went through in the interview itself, and we can just go through that, and I'll provide as much context as I possibly can. If you guys want to ask any questions in the chat, you guys are absolutely encouraged to do so. And if you guys have any questions about any of the drugs here, please ask. That's what this channel is for. So without further ado, let's hop into it. I'm going to make myself smaller here. There we go. Let's full screen Josh right there. Beautiful. All right, Josh, take it away.
In the shoes of an elite level rock climber, attempting to take every performance enhancing drug that might give me the edge on my competitors. So join me as I learn what compounds might be useful to take me to the next.
For the record, I have not used a lot of the compounds listed here. You couldn't catch me dead using trenbolone acetate. Or actually, no, acetate. Nah, I don't mess with 19-ors. I've never used Ozempic, although I use GLP-1s. I'm using a GLP-1 right now. I don't remember what MK2866 is, but chances are I probably won't be taking it. And what is atenolol? Interesting. I wonder if that's Anadrol. Neat.
Next level of performance. This video is for information and educational purposes only. I am not a medical professional and we do not condone the use of performance enhancing drugs in any way. So
same.
Obviously rock climbing has exploded in popularity and making its debut at the Olympic means one big thing. More glory and more money is going to be pumped into the sport. This also means more pressure to perform than ever before. So the big question on a lot of people's minds are some of these competitors going to start trying to get the edge over others by taking performance enhancing drugs?
And the answer is probably. So it says this at the end of the video that one of the Iranian climbers, Reza Alipur, got popped for Winstrol. And when I took a look at some of the other Iranian climbers, particularly the speed climbers, they're looking a little saucy. You know, I would not be surprised if there are climbers at elite levels that are leveraging some of these compounds. But, you know, until we see more positive tests, we're not going to know.
And that's what I'm trying to look into today. I'll be honest, going into this, I know basically nothing about performance enhancing drugs, but I am in the privileged position of being surrounded by a lot of high-level athletes, including people that have been to the Olympics. And as far
when Josh says he doesn't take drugs, I believe him. I don't even know if this dude does a lot of rec drugs, and more power to him, man. I don't think rec drugs are a thing to inherently be glorified.
As far as I know, if any doping is going on in rock climbing, it is very much underground and something I have not really seen any of. To understand what sort of performance enhancing drugs might be brought into rock climbing and the sort of thing I might want to use if I was an Olympic level climber, we first need to understand the demands of the sport. We don't just want brute strength, we need an almost paradoxical balance of being very powerful, but also being very light, so we can maximize our strength to weight ratio. We don't want to take performance enhancing drugs to then look like Mr. Olympia.
Man, I think that's actually Derek Lunsford because the arms are really terrible. That's tragic. Yeah, you probably wouldn't want to run anabolics at super high doses and get maximum mass. You probably want to leverage just enough to maintain muscle in deep caloric deficits and top out power. When you compare federations of tested versus untested sports, and you look at their overall lifts, you'll find that in the lighter weight categories, there's about an 8 to 10% increase in strength at around the 66 kg category and about 10% at the 70. So, excuse me, energy drinks getting to me. So it's reasonable to assume that you could make climbers, 5 to 10% stronger at lighter weight classes if they just opted to use PEDs. And if being 10% stronger can help you send your project, or is the difference between V17 or V18 or V18 and V19, or V19 and V20 for that matter, I think when you start getting to these upper echelons, these edges are worth taking. Or if you just want to experiment and you're not a tested athlete.
So in an effort to understand what drugs an athlete might take, I made a list of 9 physiological attributes I think a rock climber would want to maximize their performance. This includes strength to weight ratio, strength in the finger flexors, but also being able to manage things like performance anxiety and improving their endurance.
So strength to weight ratio, that's just maintaining muscle at low body fats. Finger flexor strength, that could be upregulating some of the tendon growth That could be done through your growth hormone vectors. Finger flexor endurance. I haven't seen anything that shows that any of the healing peptides that promote angiogenesis could lead to finger flexor endurance, so I'm not going to speculate that that's a thing that they could do. For upper body strength endurance, you could get that from either cardio or from compounds that have actually been leveraged in climbing to increase performance. For example, we had a Russian ice climber, pop hot for meldronium, which is a cardio booster similar to cardarine, and he was able to smash that competition despite not winning a competition for like 6 years prior. He was then banned. Energy systems, it's kind of similar to your meldroniums or your cardarines. Your recovery capacity, that could be probably testosterone if you're a guy. Realistically, if it's, and potentially growth hormone for the sleep. Body comp, again, those are your anabolics plus your GLP-1. Your mental focus, I don't like running nootropics personally, just for special occasions. It's something that, in order to get into a flow state for me personally, that means I'm running a compound frequently to be comfortable climbing on it, and not a thing that I would just take on the day on a whim, you know? It's definitely something, and the same thing goes for anxiety management. How you practice is how you perform, and I would not want to be taking random compounds, whether, you know, it's an Adderall or a beta blocker or anything like that I don't usually take. I think that would tend to make people feel a little bit wonky. When I've tried using some of these compounds in the past, because I don't practice on them, I don't climb super well on them. I would always climb very stiff on amphetamines.
Through multiple different energy systems. Luckily for me, there is a huge, and I mean huge, list of drugs available to enhance pretty much every performance characteristic I have just mentioned. And all you have to do for this is go on the World Anti-Doping Agency website.
You wouldn't catch me dead using most of the compounds on this, on the WADA anti-doping page. Jesus Christ. Like, there are so many super sketchy compounds on here that are just not worth running.
And scroll down through the list of banned substances. Performance-enhancing drugs we're going to go through are anabolic agents, recovery peptides, hematological agents, weight management drugs, and stimulants and nootropics.
All banned.
Psychology-altering drugs. First up, anabolic agents. Here we're talking about things like anabolic steroids. This might be exogenous testosterone, or things that mimic its effect, like trenbolone, or often called tren.
So just speaking about tren specifically, because it's probably the only compound outside of testosterone that most people know, tren is a garbage compound for climbers. Cannot emphasize that enough. It basically downregulates type 1 collagen synthesis and upregulates type 3, and it will increase the stiffness in tendons without increasing their overall structure. So tren is a garbage compound to run for climbers.
You can also get compounds that act in a similar way, which are non-steroidal SARMs. This stands for selective androgen modulator stimulate.
Don't run SARMs either. I've known a couple of climbers to run Osterine that claim to have good results, and like, I'll take their word on it, but there is just not enough good data on SARMs to make me choose that over other tools that are available. In general, I think pretty lowly of SARMs. If you are choosing SARMs because that's all you have access to, then I would wait for better sourcing for better compounds. I would rather run testosterone or literally anything else over a SARM almost every time.
Androgen selective. Do I need to put it on the screen? These are generally seen as providing some of the same outcomes as steroids, but may not achieve such a super physiological level as some of the major steroids do.
Pound for pound steroids are better in the doses and are safer on average. We have long-term studies for steroids, whether it's testosterone, primobolan, anavar, masteron. We do not have long-term data on SARMs. They give testosterone and anavar and growth hormone to kids. They do not give SARMs to anyone.
Under anabolics, we also have human growth hormone, or we could dope with some peptides, which would also increase the production of human growth hormone. It's a pretty big list of drugs, but my understanding in simple terms is that these all basically increase our ability to produce muscle mass and strength. But here's the hidden benefit, and it's a big one. It is accelerated recovery. Imagine being able to train.
I don't know about this claim about accelerated recovery. I think at most what you're going to see is you might feel better or you might be able to tolerate some of the pain of training, but I haven't seen that anabolics make you recover faster. It just really allows you to just mentally tolerate some of the rigor of training.
For harder and for longer with less downtime from needing to recover and muscle soreness. Particularly in elite level rock climbing, we are seeing athletes put in 20 to 30 hours of training a week, and if you could increase this even, that would give you the edge, in my mind, on other competitors. And if you're thinking 20 to 30 hours of training a week is a ridiculous amount, well, yes it is, but these athletes are often genetic outliers, able to tolerate a huge amount of training. And if you don't quite have that genetic edge, taking these sort of drugs.
So the only thing that could potentially help you here in my mind is like growth hormone would help you sleep better. Mentally being on TRT makes being tired suck less, but it doesn't mean your muscle or tendon will recover any faster just because you are on these compounds. You'll just feel better.
So it might bring you up to their level and give you that advantage to compete on the world level. The compound that seems to shine through here, especially in terms of recovery, is human growth hormone. I'm a novice in this stuff and I can't speak from experience, but this is where I'm going to bring someone in to help me with this. This is Adam, who is a rock climber, which is also taking a number of different performance-enhancing drugs to basically experiment with how it can affect his climbing. Here's a little bit of what Adam has to say on anabolic steroids.
Testing out growth hormone right now. I like GH a lot for the collagen synthesis. It seems to be the king of collagen synthesis, both in terms of its ability to upregulate, but more importantly, when you look at GH versus other anabolics, nandrolone, for example, do upregulate collagen synthesis, but it basically over-deposits the collagen. So the tendon structure and the lattice structure look.
So I actually have this model here that I sent over, and they don't do the research and I do. So here we had a sedentary rat on DECA, an exercise rat, and an exercise rat on DECA. And usually for optimal tendon thickening, look at those closed eyes, what you want is strengthening, or you want the lattice structure to be stronger in the horizontal positions. And you're seeing a lot of over-collagen deposition in the nandrolone. So I've also seen this projected as an outcome for equipoise too. I haven't seen that backed up in the literature. But the short answer is growth hormone doesn't do this. Growth hormone actually produces really strong side-to-side structures at a 3 to 4x development rate when paired with exercise. That does not happen on any other anabolic. Now, even though growth hormone is safe enough for women and children, both of which it is prescribed to, and is endogenous to men, women, and children, growth hormone is not without its drawbacks. The amount of water weight that you will gain on growth hormone is significant, at least 2 to 5 pounds, at least, depending on dosage. The edema that I have dealt with above 3 IUs, making it really difficult for me to close my fingers. I would occasionally have numbness because it tends to put pressure on one of the nerves in your forearm. I would wake up with numb thumbs and numb fingers, and it's just annoying, man. When I dose too high, it would mess up it's messed up training for me before. So low doses of growth hormone is a thing that I will run again, but it is not just a silver bullet that makes everything hunky-dory. There are ways to mitigate it. But it's not as easy as you think it is.
Really well. And the same can be said for some of the others, like Winstrol, that tends to happen.
Yep.
Malone as well.
Adam goes on to say there are some side effects with swelling and edema that he's actually felt in his fingers, and this can limit climbing a bit, but he manages it with other supplements. And this starts to touch on.
And some of those supplements, just so we're aware, is taurine. You could also lower your sodium and increase your potassium and magnesium. There are ways to mitigate it, but yeah, growth hormone's annoying. I'm going to try giving that another run later next week after lab work.
Complexities of managing different compounds to complement each other will reduce some of the side effects, but we're going to get into that topic later on. Since we're on the topic of recovery, we need to go into our next topic, which is recovery-enhancing peptides, BPC 157. Specifically, peptides like BPC 157 and TB500 are gaining attention for their ability to increase recovery, particularly in the tendons and ligaments. Given how common finger and tendon injuries are in rock climbing, Any substance that's going to increase tissue repair and reduce inflammation is going to be incredibly appealing to a rock climber. I'm going to return to Adam quickly because, again, he's got experience using these in the presence of an injury to rehab and recover.
I've used BPC to try to help out my partially torn bicep, my fingers on the tenosynovitis side. Also, your mixed edge is great, and thank you.
I still stand by my statement that I love the mixed edge, but I think most folks that are watching the video are going to be more drawn to the healing peptides, and I want to give some clarification on that really quick. Number one, we don't have long-term data on this in humans. Number two, did it heal my bicep tendon? No. I probably, even though my bicep works just fine, I would probably need surgery to fully attach that bicep tendon. However, for the tenosynovitis that I have in my fingers, yeah, it actually did expedite the recovery from 6 weeks to about 4. I opted to pin my forearms. Do not pin your fingers. That's a bad idea. But ultimately what you're doing is you're creating the formation of new veins to increase the blood flow to recover and repair some of the inflammation around these tendons. So the big caveat I want to put for both BPC and TB500 is these pathways work both ways. In the event that you're able to create new nutrient delivery systems for your tendons to recover faster, that's awesome. In the event that you have a cancer, those pathways can be used to generate nutrients to spread that cancer as well. In the event that you are chronically injured and you feel that this is a risk worth taking for you, I would highly encourage you to get a cancer screening prior to doing that to make sure that you're not exacerbating any cancer. One of the other things I'll say about growth hormone, which is another thing that could help with the injury, growth hormone doesn't contribute to cancer directly, but it does drive IGF-1, which also encourages the growth of all things, not just muscle and tendon, but also cancers. So if you're going to use any of these compounds, I highly encourage you to both watch your A1C, but also to please get a cancer screening. If you can avoid using them, I would encourage that. But if you're chronically injured and it's impacting your life, I understand why you would opt to do that. I think that that's super, super, super reasonable. Let's keep going.
Enough for releasing that. I could reduce the swelling on my ring fingers, but I needed a different training tool if I was going to sustain that. So no one's paying me to say that, by the way. It's just dope. I haven't used TB500, but that and BPC stack really well together. And the reason is both of them drive angiogenesis, or the formation of new veins.
Also, one of the weird things about TB500, and I have this in one of my other videos, it had cell division happening at rates of like embryonic cells, and I don't know if that's good or bad. The study didn't really elaborate. That seems like it could be awesome, and it also seems like it could be super spooky. TV works, but like, I am slightly scared by that compound.
Adam touches on the mechanics of how these work. We know that tendons and ligaments are notoriously slow and difficult to heal because they have a really poor blood supply and nutrient delivery. By using these compounds, we're going to increase that recovery by increasing the nutrient delivery to that area. Taking something like BPC 157 in the presence of another compound like growth hormone or an anabolic steroid seems really complementary. On one hand, you're going to massively increase your strength and muscle growth, but you're also going to increase the tendon adaptations you're going to get alongside that, and you're going to increase recovery of those hard training sessions. And in the presence of injury, which is very common among elite level sports performance, this is going to massively increase that return to play, that back to practice, which is so important. Athletes do not want downtime away from training for the sport. Adam said something interesting here, that peptides on their own are unlikely to increase your collagen synthesis to supraphysiological levels. So they will essentially reach a ceiling, but it will be much easier to achieve that ceiling while taking these peptides.
Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend this as a training tool. One of the things that I thought that I had to do research in to sort of debunk is the idea that I could get faster training gains on BPC 157 and TB500. I have not seen that confirmed anywhere in the literature. I have not seen that confirmed anywhere anecdotally. Folks talk about doing this to bulletproof themselves. I think that's stupid as hell. I think that You should take these sparingly when needed to treat an injury acutely, and otherwise not at all. It's not worth the spread risk of cancer. I think that's a preposterous thing to do. I thought about it, researched it, and have not seen any compelling evidence that it yields better gains for tendons outside of like injury recovery.
However, if you take it in the presence of something like human growth hormone, you will surpass that ceiling to supraphysiological levels.
So just take growth hormone, don't take the healing peptides.
Something that you would not otherwise be able to achieve. That's why these two compounds together would be something that's in my medicine cabinet as an elite level rock climber looking to take performance enhancing drugs. It means my tendons are going to be made of steel and my muscles are going to be extremely strong.
No. GH will help with the tendons. Look, if you want to have some TB500 and some BPC in your medicine cabinet in case shit goes wrong, I think that's fine. Once you reconstitute it with some water, it will go bad after a certain period of time. But if you just have the powder in your cabinet, it'll be fine for like a while. But yeah, don't chronically use the healing peptides. That's really, really bad. Don't do that.
As well. Next up, hematological agents like erythropoietin or EPO. This substance increases red blood cell production, which is going to improve oxygen delivery capacity of your blood. This is famously associated with endurance sports like cycling, where athletes are trying to boost their stamina. In rock climbing context, it could be used to improve performance on a long endurance sport route perhaps, or it could be used to improve recovery. If we just quickly
Yeah, so I'm going to let him finish a little bit, but I actually had a discussion with Josh about this morning, where he thinks that some of the hematological agents are potentially overrated because you really need things to manage pump. Simply getting more oxygen delivery isn't really a thing that's going to help you out as much on the wall. I think that if you have more oxygen going through the system, it would help alleviate the pump. I would also argue that you could run routes faster, particularly as a sport climber. I'm not advocating for EPO. I think it's super dangerous. But there are compounds that I have ran on the WADA banned list that I did not necessarily, that I thought would be helpful for cardio that weren't. MOTS-C being one of them. I personally have ran SLU a bunch of times, and I will probably run it again this training block. But yeah, I think, and I've heard anecdotally that both cardarine has improved performance. We've seen meldronium as a thing that improves cardio and has won speed or ice climbing competitions. It's not unreasonable to assume that this class of compound could be super useful, not so much for boulders, but you know, when I saw how exhausted Andra was working on Silence, it really makes me consider that these are compounds that are worth considering leveraging. Also, this class of compound is super dangerous. I don't know all the side effects of meldronium. The literature is mostly in Russian. Cardarine, super cancerous. Not enough data on SLUPP332. Most of the human data seems very, very promising. Some of the rodent data seems very promising and potentially questionable around cardiomegaly. But it's a vector worth exploring, and I stand by that.
Like that to like a performance in the IFFC in the World Cup. It probably would not have a huge amount because the sport climbing is capped at around 6 minutes, and you get a long rest between different rounds. You don't
Being able to do those routes faster would definitely be an edge.
have to do repeated efforts. So its utility within sport climbing on the world stage is maybe limited, but then if you take that to something more outdoor climbing, like big wall climbing, then maybe there's a better case for it. But the more I learned about EPO, the more I actually saw some big red flags come up.
True.
Firstly, if you do EPO, it's going to increase what we call your hematocrit. This is basically the ratio of red blood cells to plasma. As that ratio goes up, your blood is going to become thicker. And as it becomes thicker, there's going to be more fluid resistance in your veins and arteries. If you get this wrong, you can actually potentially have negative effects on your performance, including some pretty severe cardiovascular risks. You can also increase your red cell count by essentially giving yourself a blood transfusion. Essentially, you donate blood to yourself in the future.
By the way, if you're just taking anabolics in general, your hematology is going to change. Taking testosterone increased my hematocrit by 3 or 4 points. It's not uncommon to abuse anabolics, whether it's testosterone or equipoise, and increase your red blood cell count into the 52 to 53 range.
Transfusions are not exactly straightforward and are going to come with a lot of risks too. So then when you look at something like injecting peptides, which are a lot simpler, you can see why there's some big barriers and red flags that come up with this kind of doping in rock climbing. Lastly, I have some reservations on the effectiveness of improving oxygen delivery to the muscle. From the research we have in rock climbing, it's relatively clear that the limiting factor in our endurance is not the oxygen delivery to the muscle, but the oxygen uptake of the muscle. This is what we'd call a peripheral adaptation happening in the muscle itself versus a central adaptation, which would be changes happening in the heart, lungs, and circulation. So if our aim was to increase endurance, my hunch would be on taking something like human growth hormone to increase angiogenesis. This would be the...
So again, where we sort of differ, if you look at meldronium, cardarine, or SLU-PP332, all three of them actually improve the efficiency of oxygen carrying capacity and not just the raw blood cell count. And anecdotally from myself and from other people that I know that have taken these compounds, they have noticed a dramatic increase in the reduction of pump and feel like they can climb either half a grade to a grade harder running these compounds. Again, not enough research on SLU, cardarine, super cancerous, and meldronium, the data is in Russian. Take that for what it is.
Formation of new veins and capillaries in the muscle itself, and then something like a peptide, which might increase mitochondrial function, again, inside the muscle, those peripheral adaptations we're looking for. This is why something like EPO is not going to make it into my medicine cabinet.
Same.
Then there's the obsession with low body weight, and this takes us to weight management drugs and also things like diuretics. Diuretics allow you to rapidly reduce your weight, which is something you're going to see in combat sports like MMA, where they try to make weight for a fight to fit into a weight category.
They also do this to get rid of some of the metabolites of the drugs they took. Typically when it comes to diuretics, folks use it to make weight on the scale, but these are also leveraged by gymnasts, which are probably the closest folks to our sport as far as drug compounds to mimic. And it's not uncommon. I've seen easily 24 test failures for diuretics. Part of that could be masking agents for other drugs they took. Part of that would just be leaner on the day so that they could jump a little higher. You guys know that being 2 to 3 pounds lighter is super, super helpful when you're doing a performance sport. So that's why this class of compound is being leveraged by gymnasts and fighters alike. Would it be worth running a diuretic? I might try testing 1 or 2, but there are some nuclear ones that I would not consider touching. And I also don't think that it's worth running by and large. This is the last compound that I would consider, or the last class of compound I would consider testing.
Now in rock climbing, making weight is still an issue, but not in the same way combat sports know it. The IFFC requires athletes to provide their height and weight in an effort to calculate their BMI before competing. This is part of their relative energy deficiency in sport, RED-S policy. This process occurs with random and targeted testing at IFFC events. In climbing, we know that some athletes will have disordered eating or even an eating disorder, and this can lead to very low body weight. If the IFFC deem their body weight to be too low, they could be withheld from competing. However, the IFFC say that athletes are notified and screening is performed in the morning before an event. This gives them an opportunity to essentially try and cheat the system. This can be done by just drinking many litres of water.
I also don't know if anyone's been banned for any of these underweight competitions. I know a lot of folks that have starved themselves to death and lost muscle, but I don't know of any folks that have been pulled from competition. It might have happened, I just don't know about it.
For your weighing to try and increase your body weight, but only very temporarily. I personally don't see any reason that elite level athletes are going to be using diuretics to drop their weight. As we move into weight management drugs, we're going to go back into the realm of peptides. And some of these are used to increase fat metabolism while also maintaining muscle mass. The goal is obvious, it is to improve the strength to weight ratio. The one making headlines at the moment is Ozempic. This is a peptide which is used for weight loss, and the This is a peptide used for weight loss, and the aim or goals of this are clear. Firstly, it is going to be easier to maintain a calorie deficit without painful feelings of hunger. Or as Adam put it to me in our call, it is going to remove the emotion of hunger, which is very useful for you and the people around you.
Absolutely true. I am a hangry diva when I'm usually doing a weight cut, and being on a GLP-1 removes that, and I think that's awesome. Additionally, there are some really cool side effects to GLP-1s that are worth mentioning, in my opinion. Number one, folks with addiction, it has some impact on dopamine. I'm not entirely, excuse me, that energy drink's got me. I'm not entirely sure of all of the impacts to the dopamine system that GLP-1s have, but it seems to have an impact on reducing addiction, both in gambling. I know a lot of bodybuilders that are taking GLP-1s find themselves smoking less weed and drinking less alcohol, which I think is great. I personally find myself less compulsive around mobile games when I take a GLP-1. And I also hate traffic less. I'm not entirely sure what about that compound seems to have that impact. But yeah, I have been pretty impressed by the GLP-1s in general. Full disclosure, I've never taken Ozempic. I will never take Ozempic. That's the first generation GLP-1. Since then, they've released tirzepatide, otherwise known as Zepbound, or retatrutide, which is in phase 3 trials, but is not released to the general public yet. I've only used Reta. With Reta, the addition of the GIP agonist, it seems to rapidly increase fat loss versus the other two. So that's really the only GLP-1 I will probably use. The main side effect worth noting about Reta outside of fat loss is, dude, on the day that I pin it, I spend a day in the bathroom. It's pretty brutal. And I've seen that with a few other people too. But yeah, it definitely curbs hangry, and it makes being in a calorie deficit way easier.
Secondly, it might be very useful for changing your body composition or increasing your strength to weight ratio.
Oh, one last thing about GLP-1s that I think is super urgent. Take eating very seriously in a GLP-1. Just because your appetite is limited, getting your protein is non-negotiable. In the event that you were a natural, getting your omega-3s and DHEA is even more critical than it would be if you get your hormones from a vial. Being in severe calorie deficits will crash your endogenous hormone production, whether you're male or female. So getting your omega-3s, getting your DHEA, it's critical to maintaining healthy endocrine function, so you can maintain muscle mass and performance in calorie deficits. Same with protein. If you're not getting at least 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, you are doing GLP-1, which is wrong. If you need to throw in as many protein shakes as you need to, or easily digestible protein bars to get to those goals, please do that. In my opinion, if you're going to leverage a GLP-1 and you will lose muscle mass, you are doing it wrong. Please, for the love of God, eat your protein.
In the lead up to a comp. The thing is, certain anabolic agents, if we were taking them as well, would keep us very lean. So unless we were trying to lose a lot of weight, there really wouldn't be much case for taking these weight loss peptides. But the idea of weight loss peptides did highlight an interesting question to me. It made me wonder if a bulking and cutting cycle might be useful for rock climbers.
I say yes. The climbing community says no.
Not to the extreme that bodybuilders would go for a bulking and cutting cycle, but we know that a lot of these athletes in rock climbing are putting in these 20 to 30 or more hour weeks in their base training season. Huge training demand, and in these times we might want a very high calorie surplus to provide energy for the training and recovery.
Not only that, I also think it depends on your style of climbing. If you're mostly a slab climber, is bulking super helpful? I don't know. If you're trying to do big dynos like I am, taking time to get more power in your legs is super useful. And I don't think I could send Rainbow Rocket without taking dedicated time for squatting and plyometrics and things of that nature. So, do with that information what you will. Also, it makes it easier to lose fat better. There's also nothing wrong with going to eating at maintenance and then dieting down for a comp. That's kind of my view on this.
And knowing that we have the option to take these weight loss peptides, it might give me, as an athlete, more confidence that I can cut that weight in the shorter period in a lead up to a competition. Essentially extending the training season where I can maintain that high calorie surplus. I'm not saying this is a smart move by any stretch. I'm just saying I don't think
I am.
It's something that has been tested. And I think what is actually far more common in practice is a lot of high-level rock climbers are maintaining a very strict diet and maybe even a calorie deficit year-round to maintain very lean weights. This strict calorie restriction or calorie deficit might be much more detrimental to having a period in the year with a calorie surplus. It's just a thought. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And finally, we've made it to improving my mental game in performance. Let's start with stimulants like amphetamines, which are known for increasing alertness, concentration, and reducing our perceived fatigue. Amphetamines, for example, were reportedly used by soldiers in World War II and other times to stay awake and alert on prolonged operations. Competing in the combined event at the World Champs is a pretty big deal. There's a lot of different events.
So, real talk, don't use amphetamines unless you're prescribed them. I've tried climbing on amphetamines. I don't flow well on amphetamines. If you find yourself in a day where you've had really low sleep and you need a WADA-approved option to get as alert as possible but don't want to mess up with your flow state, I would megadose creatine. If you take 20 grams on the day, it's really helpful for wakefulness, and it's not going to make you super jittery. I actually did that on the day that I did the interview with Josh. I did not sleep because I was super nervous, so I pounded a bunch of creatine, and I felt fine.
Days to compete on, but I do think that this is probably not going to be a useful compound. I think you could make the argument that amphetamines might be able to heighten your focus and allow you to really fight hard, making it onto the head wall of a sport route. Then on the flip
You might also be over-gripping.
side, we have something like beta blockers, which are known for reducing physical symptoms of anxiety, like tremors or a racing heart rate. These are commonly used in sports like archery or shooting, where the athlete needs a steady hand and calm nerves. I've done a little bit of competing in the past, and I do suffer from a bit of performance anxiety, and I can only imagine what it would be like at the World Cup in front of a whole crowd, tying in with one attempt on a...
I've never ran beta blockers. I'd be curious if folks have climbed on them or used them after a hard session, and if that helps them get to sleep. I think that, I don't know. It's a compound I've never ran, so I couldn't tell you. On paper, it seems like it could be fine. I do like having the adrenaline when it's time to try hard that I think beta blockers would not really be optimal for. But if you have used them, feel free to let it be dropped in the chat or in a comment. That would be super interesting.
Sport climb, the performance anxiety would be overwhelming for me. Maybe not someone like Yanni Gambrep, but something like beta blockers could definitely be a game changer for an athlete that did need to calm their nerves. The big issue I see is elite level performance requires a very practiced state of mind. Most athletes are looking for what we would call flow state, the ability to be completely present in the moment and almost be on autopilot. But this requires a precise balance of anxiety, pressure, and focus, and you need to get this right to enter that flow state. If stimulants take you away from this careful balance, then it would be negative to performance. This is not powerlifting or archery, so I think these mind-altering drugs are not going to play a part in my elite level performance.
Not unless you practice with them, and I largely agree. There's, MOTS-C is a thing that I've taken for a head rush that's supposed to help with fat loss. I wasn't super impressed with that. Also, WADA banned. I know folks have ran Semax or Selank. I've never ran it. Same with cerebral ison, another compound I've never tried. I haven't done enough research on most of the nootropics to see if there's anything I enjoy climbing on. The only thing that I've ever climbed on that had a positive impact of my climbing that I would never consider running in a comp was on my home wall. I did a quarter tab of LSD, and man, I don't think I've ever dynoed so fearlessly in my life. It was a ton of fun. I don't necessarily think that's safe or that that's a good idea, especially not for comps. That's crazy. But I think there are accounts of folks aiding Half Dome back in the day, or El Cap on LSD. So, it's been done before. Doesn't mean it's to be done.
Unless they were practiced commonly throughout the year so that I get to flow with this state of mind. I think at this point, a lot of people will be saying, what about cannabis or smoking weed? There's a lot of high-level climbers which are known to smoke weed and also climb at a very high level. And I think this just comes back to my point that it probably can be performance enhancing as long as it's something that you practice a lot.
I don't buy it. I don't buy that cannabis or really any of the recreational drugs are performance enhancing. Maybe you find it that way. I disagree. You know, it's up to yourself personally. Since starting performance enhancing drugs, I have not used any recreational drugs.
Plot with your performances throughout the year. But here's the critical part. Every one of these substances comes with potentially serious risks. Anabolic steroids, for example, may increase your strength significantly, but also might increase the risk of tendon and ligament injuries or even ruptures. This is not necessarily because these drugs damage your tendons, but it's about a mismatch between the massive increase in strength that you'll get in a short period of time and the much longer time course it will take for those tendons to adapt to your newfound strength.
So that's true. The other part of that that's worth considering is there are ways that you can implement them more intelligently as a training tool. So if you pop a bunch of Anavar or Anadrol and you try to hit PRs, then yeah, you might have yourself a bad time. On the other hand, if you take that Anavar or Anadrol and you spend a week or two adapting and basically letting your body get used to its newfound horsepower, and you train closer to 80% instead of to failure, you're putting yourself in less of a risk of injury and giving your muscles and your tendons a chance to adapt to the new power that you're holding. And I think that that's really the thing that's missed. There's a meta-analysis that every coach has read that irritates the ever-living shit out of me because it's like, oh, people on TRT tended to be more likely to like mess up their ankle. And I'm like, yeah, because you have untrained people that are feeling good that all of a sudden start getting really active and then hurting themselves. And if you actually take some time to just warm up to your newfound strength and build that up, then yeah, you're less likely to get injured. Now you might retort back, well, it takes longer for tendons to build up than muscle, and that's true. But how you choose to engage this is really going to lead to how it's impacted. If you're going toward failure or really violent movement, yeah, you increase your risk of injury dramatically. If you're doing more controlled movements and trying to engage the muscles versus the tendons, I think that you have a much better opportunity to be safer with the compounds that you're leveraging.
What you get are athletes which are literally able to rip their tendons off their bone.
And people do this naturally, by the way.
This is the hidden injury paradox. You feel stronger, but you are actually more vulnerable. In talking to Adam on this topic, he said that it's more due to an incorrect implementation of performance-enhancing drugs. If you were to take something...
Who is this Adam guy, and why is he so fucking right?
...like an anabolic steroid, you could increase your tendon strength alongside that by taking something like human growth hormone. But Adam does point out very clearly the other health risks that come with performance-enhancing drugs. Firstly, messing around your endocrine system, your very well-balanced hormone system is risky business. Then we have the question of sourcing these. So just talking on the endocrine system really quick. I mentioned this in my last video. I mentioned this when I was talking to Josh, but I just sort of want to throw this out there. I didn't opt to start anabolics until my natural testosterone started dipping. I had been tracking my labs for 5 years prior. I had been lifting really consistently for those 5 years, and this was always my end goal. This wasn't a thing that I did on a whim. This was planned. I'd wanted to do this for 20 years. I am perfectly comfortable getting my hormones from a vial for the rest of my life. That might not be you, and I think that's great. The other part is, and I mentioned this literally on my last video yesterday, can you take exogenous testosterone, make meaningful gains, and then restart your endocrine system and be okay for your longevity? Yes. Will that allow you to keep the gains that you got on that supraphysiological level of testosterone? No. We could have discussions over like, yeah, you're still altering your mononuclei, so you potentially keep that ceiling, and maybe you might keep 5 to 10% of those gains. Yeah, maybe, that's possible. But can you be as effective super sauced as you would off? No, man. But we've seen in literature that folks seem to be able to run up to 600 milligrams of androgens relatively safely for 20-week periods and durations. My lab work looked awesome after 9 months in duration on 400 to 500 milligrams of androgens. So, you know, it's safer than it looks from a longevity perspective. And I'd also argue that as long as you take the risks eyes wide open and you're doing the meaningful testing, it can
steroids are never safe, but you can make it a much safer practice.
Performance-enhancing drugs.
Let's be honest for a second, right? These are not FDA-approved drugs.
Yeah.
Okay, real quick. When I make this statement, I'm talking about a whole slew of other compounds, not testosterone or HGH, which you can get from a doctor.
Even though I have an ocean of anecdotal data and have tested it on myself that these are helpful compounds, you're probably not getting this from a medical provider. If you are, they're of one of like lower repute. And I think these compounds are helpful, but I have no long-term safety data on any of this.
When I'm saying this, I'm talking about long-term safety data on, equipoise, masteron, primobolan, anavar. And by the way, I'm talking about this from an underground source. Of course we have long-term data on anavar. They've given it to children. Of course we have long-term data on primobolan and masteron. I think masteron is still technically a controlled substance that could be compounded from a compounding pharmacy. We don't have a lot of long-term data in humans on equipoise, but we have a lot of anecdotes from bodybuilders. And we have no anecdotal data on SARMs. For the healing peptides, 0 long-term data. Cannot emphasize that enough. We have 40 years of research actually on GLP-1s, so they're actually a lot more studied than we think they are. But, when you're getting stuff from underground sources, and even if you're getting stuff from TRT clinics, they're all still getting their raw materials from China, and not everyone batch tests. I was watching a podcast from John Jewett, who's awesome, and you should check him out, J3 University, where they were getting bunk primobolan from a compounding pharmacy, and you had women pinning testosterone propionate that was disguised as primo, and that's horrific. So, you have to test your stuff. Shout out to Genoshic Labs. Awesome testers.
Even when you start to mitigate a lot of these health risks, what struck me is how complex it is balancing a number of these different compounds or supplements to try and keep your health markers up.
Understanding how compounds play together is only a small part of the equation, right?
Yeah.
Whether you are natural or enhanced or anything, get blood work. This is not optional. You
Get blood work. This isn't optional. Natty or not, you should be getting blood work.
need to see where your labs are when things are good to know when things are bad.
Anabolic Insights, code climbing for 10% off.
And also, as you take exogenous drugs, your labs will probably get worse, and there are things that you can take to keep things better in range. Yeah. So if you take growth hormone, your A1C is going to be an issue, and your insulin sensitivity will be an issue. So either lowering your carbs or using a GLP-1 to do that can help get those things in range. If you're taking something like Anavar, your cholesterol that's a little bit higher, or really most anabolics, it causes dyslipidemia. So your HDL will lower, your LDL will rise. You need to combat that. Okay. You can take...
I am not a doctor, but everything I just said there is based, true, and scientifically accurate.
Some more fish oil and get all the omega-3s that you can, and that can help with the HDL. But you might want to take something like ezetimibe or a statin to basically lower your LDL, so that this way you don't have as much of a risk for heart problems.
It's a balancing act between a lot of them.
Yep. And by the way, there's a whole other group of things you could take to limit some of the damage to your liver or kidneys, whether that's Tudka, milk thistle, or some of these things.
In hearing this, I thought to myself, there is no way I would feel safe taking performance-enhancing drugs.
And you probably shouldn't too if you feel this way. This is something that you do because you want to. No one should pressure you into PEDs. That's fucked up.
Seems like the very basic first step would be to find yourself a coach or pharmacist to basically do all of this work for you, if you were, in my case, completely unexperienced with this whole topic.
Or if you have questions, just join the Discord. Come hang out, ask me questions. I respond to basically everything.
All of this so far has also assumed you are a male. If you are a female, there are added risks to taking things like anabolic steroids.
If you go over that line and your voice starts to deepen, or you start growing hair, or losing hair, or your face starts to masculinize, this does not reverse when you come off the compound. Once you step over these thresholds, you don't go back.
True. I actually really encourage you to check out Hannah Hussein. She is a IFBB pro bodybuilder, and she has done tons and tons and tons of steroids and talks about the impact of anabolics on females. It's pretty gnarly stuff, man. So when you start to use exogenous hormones, particularly testosterone derivatives, whether that's testosterone or dihydrotestosterone derivatives, you will masculinize. Women taking above 35 milligrams of androgens will start to masculinize. That is the base dose for transitioning from a female to male trans person. So yeah, if you start taking exogenous androgens, don't be surprised if you start to masculinize.
Two things would need to be considered very carefully. First is the dose you're taking. In some cases, it will need to be very small, and it can be very hard to get that dosing right based on what you're going to receive from your supplier. And secondly is the duration you're taking those drugs for. If you take them for too long, a lot of those things are irreversible.
100% correct. And if you are a woman and you opt to do this, growth hormone is one of realistically your only pathways to do relatively safely. It's an exogenous hormone for you. Oof, I do not recommend playing with any of DHT or testosterone derivatives as a female. If you want to do that, find a bodybuilding coach. Please, for the love of God, get your stuff tested. Go down to the folks over at Genoshic Labs, and they will tell you how pure and how highly dosed your stuff is. But like, oof, if you're a female, please, for the love of God, do not use testosterone or DHT derivatives.
And if you're a climber which decided to take stimulants for a performance enhancement, you need to remember that these can potentially mask pain signals and allow you to push through pain into an injury.
True.
Some will also come with significant cardiovascular risk like raised blood pressure and risk of heart attacks. Weight loss peptides like Ozempic, well, I probably don't need to spell it out for you how this could be very damaging in a sport which also has a number of eating disorder cases. In the female population, I think this is also scarier again because
eating disorders are bad form for both men and women. I do not encourage eating disorders. Do not run these peptides if you have a history of eating disorders. Cannot emphasize that enough.
Eating disorders or low energy availability will lead into that red S, and this can cause things like a dysfunction in menstrual cycle and also loss in bone mineral density.
By the way, all of that is also applicable for men. If you are not eating enough, your endocrine system will crash, you will go hypogonadal, and you will lose muscle. So don't do that.
Which can lead to things like bone fractures. Oh, this is a little bit of history. The big question I had, and I think a lot of people have, is this actually happening? Is drug use prevalent within rock climbing? So there's challenges to trying to figure this out and do research, obviously. We know the IFFC says that any athlete under the testing jurisdiction of the IFFC may be tested at any time with no advance notice in or out of competition and be required to provide a urine or blood sample. But I'm unsure how frequently this is done, and obviously this is...
About 3 times a year. Athletes are tested 3 times a year. I think Andra and Yanya are probably tested 5 to 6 times a year. At least that's what I was able to see on the IFSC website. Would it be possible to beat some of the out-of-competition tests? Yes. So typically, when you're doing WADA testing, you can get up to 3 whereabouts violations. So if you guys know who John Jones is, very famous MMA fighter and also prolific alcoholic, there is a very famous story of him hiding under the cage at his training center for like 8 hours to avoid a test because he knew he was going to piss hot. John also had multiple drug failures. It's entirely possible that there are climbers that are dodging or that could dodge a whereabout violation in order to retest at a later date. Things like short-acting esters or things that clear pretty quickly are things that could be leveraged to beat a drug test if you're able to like work within that window. It's a thing that can be done in an off-season context. I don't promote cheating. I think that's fucked up. But there are people that cheat in tested organizations all the time. So I'm just trying to be very obvious with, the reality that exists within drug testing. Also, watch Icarus the movie. It's fucking incredible.
Only happening with rock climbers that are actively competing for the IFFC. Now with rock climbing in the Olympics, maybe we will see official drug testing become more frequent under the World Anti-Doping Agency. So we can basically look for evidence of doping in rock climbing from 2 sources: people which have openly admitted it and people which have been flagged by the IFFC for taking drugs. We've seen a case of the Spanish climber Edu Marin being flagged for taking cocaine, although he said he was taking this for stress and not performance reasons. The only other case that's been reported is with the Iranian climber Reza.
Yeah, that guy doesn't look saucy at all. What are we talking about? Reza looks natty as fuck. By the way, Reza is super strong. He pissed hot for Winstrol. And our boy Reza also had some pretty awful placings on the day. Toilet paper tendons. Appreciate you saying what's up. Matthias, thanks for coming by. I don't sell drugs, Matthias, but you're welcome to come hop out or hang out in the Discord and we can talk about them. I don't sell drugs.
Tested positive for taking steroids, which makes him the only currently banned athlete in the IFSC from competitions. Seriously, if you go on the website, you can scroll down, and the only athlete on that page is Reza. And I actually think this is a really cool thing. This is a sign that there is at least not much doping that we know of going on in rock climbing. There are some cases of people coming out and openly admitting about taking steroids and doing rock climbing. One of the big ones is legendary climber John Long from America, who has said he did a cycle of steroids and
he also said he felt strong as a bear when he did it. I feel like John was probably one of those dudes that was doing the old school cycle of 500 tests. I don't know exactly what he took. I should text him and try to ask. I don't know if he'd tell me, but yeah, should be fun.
saw pretty amazing strength gains from doing it. But let's quickly dive into the ethics of doping, because I think it becomes quite a grey area when we talk about outdoor rock climbing and we move away from competitions. In high altitude climbing, drugs like dexamethasone and is that how you say it? Dexamethasone? In high altitude climbing, drugs like dexamethasone might help you feel better and avoid things like altitude sickness and give you a better chance of summiting. But is this cheating, or is it just a necessary safety precaution? Now, what if you are a pro rock climber and you are just competing with your peers in the industry for sponsorship deals and media attention? And what if you're an aging pro climber, maybe you're now in your 50s and you're trying to compete with the next generation of rock climbers?
Sharma, please let me put you on like a protocol. I would love nothing more than to do Sharma to the gills. I could do so much fun stuff with Chris Sharma. Chris, if for whatever reason you are stumbling on this and you want to talk about Sending Silence or Project Big or some V17 or V18, bro, hit me up. Let's talk. I'm positive, you being in Spain, we could get you on a similar TRT protocol to Dorian Yates, and it would be fucking awesome.
Which are coming along and flashing your hardest descents. You might be taking performance-enhancing drugs just to maintain your performance that you had in younger years. Is it unfair to be doping in that situation? My personal opinion on this is that honesty is probably the most important part and goes a long way to making it fair. Let me know what you...
I largely agree. If you're going to take drugs, be honest about it. No one loves a fake natty. Your body, your choice is kind of how I feel about this, especially as you're aging. Who gives a shit? That's kind of my take on it. If you're a tested competitor, that's super shitty. Don't do that. If you're an untested competitor and you're at pushing the limits of the grades, be honest. And also, like, if you're just a random dude that enjoys PEDs and enjoys climbing, dude, live your truth. Just be safe. I cannot emphasize that last part enough. Just be honest and just be safe.
Your opinions are in the comments below. So currently there is very little doping in rock climbing, or so it appears.
There's a little bit. I don't know how much there is at the pro angle, but I've talked to a number of dudes now that have taken drugs to improve. And a lot of those guys had taken drugs prior to coming into climbing. But it exists. We just have a really quiet doping culture. I just kind of want to reiterate, Josh got a fuck ton of hate for making this video, and I don't think he deserved it. I think that it's really important that we start these conversations. I think a lot of mountaineers also leverage a decent amount of pharma. And, you know, it's completely reasonable that we have these conversations like mature adults instead of being whiny Puritans. That's stupid.
Anti-doping agencies have an immense challenge to try and catch people that are still doping in sports. So would it be naive to think that it will stay this way? We won't see many cases of doping in rock climbing. This is a complex topic with no easy answers, and it touches on health, ethics, and the definition of fair play.
I mean, tendons, the hate was super expected. I wasn't surprised by that in the slightest. You know, I think we do have probably the sweetest, most open-minded community about bringing in new people and encouraging people to send their projects. But yeah, we have a really heavy anti-drug culture for reasons I can kind of understand. I wish folks were more open-minded to at least having the discussion. when I've proposed some of this stuff on Reddit before, it's some of like the most brutal hate that I've ever gotten. And, you know, we see it from like in general, there's a lot of like anti-anabolic sentiment from natty folks. I think that's understandable. Where it's like, oh, you shouldn't use this until you do that, or you shouldn't like, or oh, it's cheating, blah blah blah. Like, okay, that's fine. I just disagree. If you want to do stuff to your own body that's not hurting anyone, sort of live your truth. I think that it's like, here's my steel man for it. I would rather do this research for myself and for the community, so people do not listen to anecdotes that make no sense and people get hurt. People are going to dope whether we talk about it or not. A lot of the doses for bodybuilders do not make sense for rock climbers. Most of the information out there needs to be reviewed. I cannot tell you how many things I have heard on the forums or in the research that when I've double checked it, it was incorrect. And that's why it's important that we build protocols for our community, for the folks that are going to use, they can use as safely as possible. And, you know, some people will say abstinence only, and that shit has worked literally fucking never. So that's my pushback to the folks that have issues with this kind of research and this kind of discussion. And, you know, if they're not very open-minded, then it'd be like that.
But we also all want to see the next level of performance. We want to see a 9B boulder.
I do.
And performance-enhancing drugs might have some way in playing into that. I want to say a massive thank you to Adam in taking the time to talk with me. He knows a lot more than I do on this.
And I want to thank Josh for answering this email. Like, guys, I've reached out to over a dozen climbing coaches, most of which have said they haven't worked with anyone that has done this or not even peripherally known about it. I've only found one coach in the climbing community that says he knows of folks that dope. I'm not going to out them, but, you know, 1 in 12 of like the most famous guys you know it's a pretty low percentage. These guys don't deserve hate for this kind of discussion. But yeah, it's happening, which is super, super rare, or at least very hush-hush. I probably have another 20 minutes until I have my next thing that I got to do. But if you guys have any questions in the chat, you guys are welcome to answer. It's such a bummer that these guys got hate for this. Like, I really wish that this had a better reception, but, you know, it kind of is what it is. Throw that hate my way, dude. That's what it's for. Jesus. I am terrified of looking at some of these comments right now.
By the end of this video,
I don't think this is for outrage. I think that this is you know, it's a reasonable discussion. I agreed with this take. My dog is already barking. I think he needs to go out. Yeah, I'm a V6, V7 climber. I think that's fair. But I think my research is probably unmatched in the community. I would never run this compound, or I would never run this stack. All right, guys, my dog's barking. It's probably time for me to mosey. If you guys have stuck around this far, I really appreciate it. Matthias, Toilet Paper Tendons, thanks for coming to hang out. This was a really important day for the channel. Had a lot of new subscribers. I welcome you here. Obviously, guys, safety and education is my reason for running this channel. And honestly, if there are going to be personal attacks, that's fine. I'm a dude talking on the internet. That's part of the territory. It's totally acceptable. But please do not direct them at Josh or the Lattice crew. I think those guys are awesome and doing some really important work. So, as always, big hugs, happy sending. I'll see you guys soon and expect way more content. Cheers.